What if Jesus had already taught exactly how to stop a thought you cannot control? Because there is a detail about your mind that almost no one notices, and it is keeping you trapped in the same pattern. What if what psychology today calls the anxious mind had already been described in another way thousands of years ago? There is something you need to understand first. An intrusive thought is not a sign of weakness. In psychology, intrusive thoughts are images, phrases, or impulses that arise without invitation. They appear without authorization, and often they are exactly the kind of thought you would rather not have. And here is the most uncomfortable part. Some of the most disturbing thoughts you've ever had say absolutely nothing about who you are. But here is the point that changes everything. The brain does not only produce conscious thoughts, it also produces mental noise. Your nervous system is constantly trying to predict risks, solve problems, simulate scenarios, and in this process, random thoughts arise. Some neutral, others uncomfortable, others completely outside your usual pattern. And when you try to control this by force, something curious happens. Psychology calls this the ironic process. The more you try not to think about something, the more the brain focuses on it to ensure you are avoiding it. In other words, trying to control the thought strengthens the thought, and that is how the cycle of intrusive thoughts is born. But there is a way out, and it begins with understanding, not with force. Perhaps you have already experienced this. A thought appears, and you feel immediate discomfort, not because of the thought itself, but because of what it means. Why did I think this? Does this say something about me? But here is the truth almost no one tells you. Thought does not define identity. In neuroscience, thoughts are electrical and chemical patterns that happen in milliseconds. They arise even before your consciousness evaluates them. In other words, you do not choose the initial thought, you choose what you do with it. And shortly, you will understand why trying to control this is exactly what keeps this cycle alive. Because there is an essential difference. The thought that arises and the thought that you feed one is automatic. The other is a decision. In the teachings of Jesus, there is a deep understanding of the human mind. In Matthew 15:19, he says, "For out of the heart come evil thoughts." In the language of that time, heart was not emotion. It was the mind, consciousness, the center of decision. Jesus was not saying that you choose every thought. He was revealing something more subtle. The mind is a field where thoughts arise, but also where decisions are taken. In modern psychology, this connects with the idea of automatic thoughts, involuntary, and deliberate thoughts, conscious. Jesus recognized that internal suggestions exist, but the focus is not on the emergence. It is on what you do next. There is a crucial moment that reveals this in a practical way. In Matthew 4, during the temptation in the desert, Jesus is confronted by ideas, suggestions, thoughts. Turn stone into bread. Throw yourself down from here. Prove who you are. Perceive this with depth. Jesus did not try to silence the thought. He did not panic. He did not identify with the suggestion. He simply did not give it continuity. Perceive something profound. He does not enter into emotional conflict. He does not blame himself for hearing it. He does not try to expel the idea with force. He simply responds with truth. This reveals an essential principle. Thought is not sin. Consent is choice. Or, in modern terms, the intrusive thought is the knock on the door, but you decide who enters. Now, something fascinating. In Matthew 6:22, Jesus says, The eye is the lamp of the body. This goes far beyond physical vision. In the science of consciousness, this connects with attention. Where your attention goes, your neural energy goes. The brain functions by reinforcement. The more you pay attention to something, the more neural connections are strengthened. This is neuroplasticity. In other words, repeated attention creates mental paths. That which you repeatedly observe begins to become what you experience internally, and that which you experience internally begins to feel like reality. So when you fix your attention on an intrusive thought, even while trying to resolve it, you are strengthening that circuit. That is why the teaching is subtle. It is not ignoring. It is not feeding. In Proverbs 4:23, keep your heart, for from it flow the springs of life. From a psychological and physiological point of view, your mind is a system for generating patterns. These patterns influence emotions, decisions, perception of reality. In practice, what you repeat internally becomes your external experience. This is not mystical, it is neurobiological. Your brain creates filters, and these filters determine what you perceive in the world. If your mind is trained in fear, you see threat. If it is trained in stability, you see possibilities. That is why guarding the mind is not repressing thoughts. It is selecting what remains. Now you understand enough to apply it. 1. Label cognitive awareness. Say, this is an intrusive thought. This activates the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for consciousness and control. You step out of autopilot. 2. Observe de-identification. See the thought as an event, not as identity. This reduces the emotional activation of the amygdala. The fear system begins to slow down. 3. Replace, reprogramming. In 2 Corinthians 10:5, take every thought captive. This is literally cognitive restructuring. You identify the thought and replace it with a more stable truth. 4. Anchor, physiological regulation. In Philippians 4:8, whatever is true, think about these things. This directs the focus, and focus regulates the nervous system. Less cortisol, more balance, and in that moment, you feel the body slow down, breathing changes. The thought may still be there, but it no longer carries the same weight. When you practice this, you interrupt the cycle: thought, reaction, reinforcement, and you create a new pattern: thought, observation, dissolution over time. The brain learns that that thought is not relevant, and it stops repeating it. And when this happens a few times, the brain learns something new. This thought is not a priority, and that which is not a priority simply ceases to be repeated. This is neural learning. In John 8:32, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The truth here is simple and deeply liberating. You are not the voice in your mind. You are the one who perceives the voice. And when you realize this, something changes. Silently, the mind slows down. Space appears, and in that space, there is something that does not depend on thoughts. Peace. The thought may knock at the door, but you decide if it enters, and perhaps today is the first time that you truly realize this. So tell me, when the next thought arises, will you fight with it, or just observe and let it pass? Or perhaps you simply will not answer. Today you realize that your mind responds to what you repeat, and that the teachings of Jesus aren't just inspiration, they are direction for your consciousness. They shape maturity, They build discernment. They develop a stable mind, one that isn't dependent on circumstances. But transformation doesn't happen just because you understand something. It begins with a decision, and it's solidified through small actions, repeated every single day. A video can awaken you, but consistency is what rewires you. That's how the mind is reprogrammed. That's how emotional independence is formed. That's how you move out of internal scarcity and begin to live with clarity, stability, and abundance of awareness. And from that abundance comes a lighter life, more inwardly prosperous, less controlled by fear, more aligned with purpose. Now here's the turning point. If you leave this moment and change nothing, your mind will keep reinforcing yesterday's pathways. And yesterday's pathways produce yesterday's results. But if you begin today, even with one simple step, a new structure starts to form. What you do in the next 24 hours begins shaping the direction of the next few months. If you want to step out of the anxiety cycle, if you want to anchor your mind in truth daily and build a life that feels steady, light, and inwardly prosperous, I've organized a practical path to help you do exactly that. This isn't about more information. It's about training. It's about guided consistency. It's about intentionally rewiring your mind. If something in you resonated with this, don't ignore that pull. If you feel ready to go deeper, access is available through the link in the description. Not because you need to buy something, but because this might be the moment you choose to begin differently. It's a next step, but it could be the beginning of an entirely new internal foundation.